She looked me dead in the eye in front of all her dinner guests and said, "Honey, I wouldn't lend you $1,000 if my life depended on it. People like you don't pay things back." I smiled, said, "Yes, ma'am," went back to the kitchen, and stood there for a moment with my hands on the counter thinking, she has absolutely no idea what's coming. My hands were still damp from washing the crystal glasses she used for her guests, the ones I wasn't allowed to drink from, the ones I washed by hand every single week, because she didn't trust the dishwasher with them. But she trusted me. She trusted me with everything in that house, everything except her respect. What Mrs. Diana Whitmore did not know, what absolutely nobody knew, was that sitting in a sealed envelope inside the lining of my work bag was a lottery ticket worth $1.4 million, after taxes, deposited, confirmed, mine. And I was still showing up. Not because I had to, because I had a plan. Because while she sat at the head of that table treating me like I was part of the furniture, I already knew exactly what I was going to do with that money. First, find out who the people around me really were. Second, never forget what I learned. And third, and this was my favorite part, build something so big that her name wouldn't even fit inside it. If you've ever worked for someone who looked right through you like you weren't even there, tell me about it in the comments. Drop a like, hit subscribe, because this story is for you. And it did not end the way Mrs. Whitmore expected, not even close. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand what I walked away with from that house in Bel Air, you need to understand who I was before I walked into it, and what I was carrying that no amount of money in that zip code could ever buy. My name is Claudette Williams, Cleo, to the people who know me. I'm 39 years old and I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, in a neighborhood where everybody knew everybody and nobody had much of anything, but people showed up for each other anyway. My grandmother raised me after my mom got sick when I was 9. Grandma Rose worked as a hotel housekeeper for 31 years. She wore her uniform like it was a suit. She said, "Baby, there is no such thing as shameful work. There is only shameful treatment." I didn't fully understand what she meant until I was standing in someone else's kitchen in Bel Air at 11 o'clock at night, washing crystal glasses that were not mine. I came to Los Angeles at 25 with a duffel bag, $200 in cash, and the phone number of a cousin who lived in Inglewood. I didn't have a job, didn't have a plan, didn't have anything except the bone-deep certainty that I needed to change my life, and I changed it. Slowly, on sheer will, with a lot of wrong turns and a lot of starting over. I worked front desk at a motel in Culver City, I worked at a catering company doing setup and breakdown for events, and this is where something started clicking for me because I was good at it. Not just at the physical work, at the whole thing. At seeing how an event should flow before it happened, at anticipating what was going to go wrong before it went wrong, at managing a room full of people with competing needs and making it look seamless. I had a gift for it, but gifts don't always pay bills on the timeline bills need to be paid. When the catering company downsized, I moved to private household staffing because the money was more consistent, and I was good at that too, maybe too good, because people like Mrs. Whitmore have a way of taking good and never saying thank you for it. By the time I got to the Whitmore house, I had 6 years of private household experience. I knew how to run a house. I knew how to manage staff schedules, coordinate vendors, execute events for 150 people, handle everything from the grocery order to the florist to the breakdown without being asked twice. I did all of that for the Whitmores. My job title was housekeeper. My actual job was everything they didn't want to think about. The Whitmore estate was on Stradella Road in Bel Air. 8 bedrooms, 2 guest houses, a pool and spa, a home theater, a full staff kitchen separate from the family kitchen, and a gate with a camera that I had to ring to enter even after 3 years of working there. Mr. Richard Whitmore was a senior VP at a major entertainment company in Century City. He worked long hours and was largely a ghost in his own house. Mrs. Diana Whitmore was the house. She ran it, controlled it, defined it. She was in her mid-50s, impeccably put together, and she had perfected a particular kind of cruelty that never raised its voice. The kind that sounds like management when it's actually contempt. The interview was her walking me through the house, explaining the rules like I was being briefed on a military operation. No personal calls inside the main house, no eating in the dining room or family kitchen, staff meals in the back kitchen only, no sitting in any chair or sofa in the family areas. Guest bathrooms were for guests. The staff bathroom was down the hall near the laundry. She said all of this with a pleasant expression, like she was describing a hotel policy, but it wasn't a hotel, It was a home, and I was going to live in a room at the end of the East Wing and be in that building every day and somehow not be allowed to sit down in it. The pay was $48,000 a year, off the books, cash, direct deposit to my account, no paperwork, no pay stubs, nothing. She presented this like it was doing me a favor. We keep it simple, less hassle for everyone, and I accepted because I needed the work and because I didn't fully understand yet what off the books was going to mean for me legally down the line. I understand it now. From the very beginning, I felt something was wrong. Not one single thing, a collection of small things that anyone on the outside would say I was overreacting to. It was the way she spoke to me versus the way she spoke to everyone else. Her personal trainer got a good morning, how are you feeling today? Her decorator got coffee and a conversation. I got instructions, always instructions, never a question, never curiosity about who I was or where I was from or what I thought about anything. 3 years in that house and she never once asked me where I grew up. It was the Christmas party. Every year the Whitmores hosted a holiday party for about 80 people. Colleagues, neighbors, people from the industry. I coordinated that event from the ground up. Vendor calls, menu planning, staffing, setup, execution, breakdown. I did it 3 years in a row. 3 years in a row, Mrs. Whitmore stood at the door, greeting guests, taking credit for the evening. I was in the back making sure it ran. Not once did she say my name in that house full of people. I was staff. Staff doesn't get introduced. It was Ashton, the daughter, 22, just back from a year abroad. The kind of pretty that had never been told no about anything. She called me the housekeeper when she talked about me to her friends, even when I was standing right there. Not Cleo, not Claudette, the housekeeper. Like a job title was a substitute for a name. And it was the camera. There was a camera in the hallway that pointed directly at the door to my room. General security for that wing, Mrs. Whitmore said when I noticed it. The cameras at the front gate, the driveway, the pool area, all clearly marked, all obviously for the property. The camera in the staff hallway, small, angled precisely at my door. That one I only noticed because I was paying attention. I stayed. Month after month, I stayed. Because the money was steady and because I was saving. And because I told myself it was just how these households worked and I needed to stop being sensitive. But something was building underneath the surface. Denise was the person who told me the truth without wrapping it in anything soft. Denise is my best friend, going on 6 years now. She does private household staffing too, a few different families in the Pacific Palisades and Calabasas area. We met at a training session put on by a domestic workers organization in Koreatown and just kept showing up for each other after that. Denise is 41, originally from Baton Rouge, single mom with a teenage son she is raising entirely on her own and doing it better than most people do it with two. It was a Sunday afternoon at a Haitian restaurant on Crenshaw after a long week that Denise looked at me across the table and said, "Cleo, you've told me 4 stories about this woman today, 4, and you're still making excuses for her." I'm not making excuses, I'm explaining context. When you do it for someone who treats you bad, explaining and excusing are the same thing. I went quiet. She kept going. "You know you're not the first one she's done this to, right? I know someone worked there before me. 2 somebodies. There was a woman named Patricia who left without her last month's pay. And before her, a woman named Gloria who got let go with an accusation. Mrs. Whitmore told the agency Gloria had stolen jewelry. Gloria swears she never touched anything that wasn't hers." "How do you know all this?" "Because the household staffing world in this part of LA is a lot smaller than you think, Cleo. We talk." That conversation stayed with me for weeks, and I started watching differently. I started noticing not just what was said to me, but what was happening around me. Mrs. Whitmore and Mr. Whitmore argued, not loudly, not openly, but I heard the shape of it through closed doors when I was working in adjacent rooms. Arguments about money, about accounts, about something involving a property in Palm Springs that I heard referenced but never explained. Mr. Whitmore was barely a presence in that house. When he was there, he barely spoke to anyone, including his wife. Ashton had come back from her year abroad with an extra layer of something that I can only describe as the confidence of someone who has never faced a real consequence. She treated the house like a hotel she had permanent residence in, and she treated me like room service. One afternoon her friends came over and they sat by the pool, and I brought out the fruit and cheese board they'd asked for, and I heard Ashton say, loudly enough for me to hear, "She's been with us forever, she basically runs the house." Her friend said, "Oh, that's sweet." And Ashton said, "I mean, it's her job." They laughed. I set the board down and went back inside. And then the day happened that planted the seed for everything that followed. It was a Thursday morning. My mother, who still lives in Memphis and who I send money to every month, had fallen. She was at the hospital. The neighbor who found her called me. My mother needed a procedure, needed me to authorize it, and her supplemental insurance had a gap that meant there was going to be a cost I needed to cover right away. I needed $500, just 500. I didn't have it liquid that day because I'd just sent my regular monthly transfer home and I was waiting on a small payment from a side job to clear. I asked Mrs. Whitmore for an advance. I explained the situation simply and directly. It was 9:30 in the morning. 3 of her friends were there for what she called a working brunch. Women from her charity board, sitting at the dining table with mimosas and laptop bags. Mrs. Whitmore looked at me, then she looked at her friends, then she looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. And I'd seen a lot of her expressions in 3 years. It was the look of someone who has decided to perform for an audience. "Cleo," her voice was patient in the way that isn't patience at all. "You know I don't do advances. That's not how this works. Mrs. Whitmore, it's $500. My mother is in the hospital. I understand that. But this isn't something I'm in a position to do. Advances create complications." She paused, tilted her head slightly. "And honestly, and I say this with kindness, if you're not able to manage your finances well enough to have something set aside for emergencies, that's a conversation you might want to have with yourself." I heard one of the women at the table shift in her chair. No one said anything. Mrs. Whitmore set down her coffee mug. "I wouldn't lend you $1,000 if my life depended on it. People like you don't pay things back." She said it like a fact, like she was telling me the weather. One of her friends, I will never forget this, picked up her phone and looked at the screen, just to have somewhere else to look. I said, "Okay, I understand," and I walked back to the kitchen. I called Denise from the back hallway. I told her what happened in 3 sentences. "Give me your Zelle," Denise said. No questions, no pause. "Denise, you don't have to." "Cleo, give me your Zelle." She sent $520 in 4 minutes, with a text that said, "Go take care of your mama. Tell me later." I stood in that hallway for a moment holding my phone, thinking about what had just happened. The woman whose house I kept, whose events I ran, whose crystal glasses I washed by hand, she wouldn't lend me $500 because of what she assumed about people like me. And the woman who makes a fraction of what the Whitmores spend on wine each month sent it without blinking. That day got filed somewhere deep in me that I didn't have a name for yet. 3 weeks after that Thursday, on a Friday night, I was sitting at the small desk in my apartment in Inglewood. I'd stopped living in the Whitmore house 3 months earlier, started renting my own place, kept the job, and I was checking a lottery ticket I'd bought almost by accident at a gas station near the freeway. I played occasionally, not with real hope, more out of habit. My grandma Rose used to say, "Every now and then, God uses a little paper slip to rearrange things." I checked once, twice, 3 times. I went to the lottery website. I used the ticket checker. I read the number that came up, $1,412,000. I sat there for a while not moving. Then I put the ticket in a plastic zip bag, put that inside a sealed envelope, put that inside the inner lining of my work bag, and went and stood in the shower until the water ran cold. The next morning I called in sick, one of maybe 4 times in 3 years, and drove to the lottery claims office. I sat across from a representative with my ticket and my ID and the most neutral expression I could manage. I signed what needed signing. I answered what needed answering. I chose direct deposit. The processing took a few days. When the amount appeared in my account, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my bank and did not move for about 10 minutes. What I felt wasn't exactly joy. It was closer to the feeling of a door swinging open that you'd been pushing against for a very long time without knowing if it would ever move. And then I made a decision that felt strange in the moment and feels exactly right looking back. I wasn't going to tell anyone. I was going to keep showing up to work, keep paying my rent, keep living the same life. But before I changed anything, I needed to know one thing that money doesn't tell you directly. Who are the people who are actually in your corner? The $1,000 test came to me on a Tuesday night while I was eating leftovers and staring at the ceiling. It was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. I was going to ask to borrow $1,000 from every significant person in my life: family, employers, colleagues, friends, acquaintances. Without explaining why, just ask and watch. It wasn't a trap, it was a mirror. Because when you ask someone to lend you money, you find out exactly what they think of you, whether they trust you, whether they respect you, whether they see you as someone who keeps their word, or as someone they wouldn't even risk it with, because somewhere underneath everything, they don't really take you seriously. I made a list, 15 people, and I started. I started with Denise. I called her on a Monday morning before she left for work. Denise, I need a favor. Can you lend me $1,000? I've got something I need to handle this week. 2 second silence. Cleo, I've got 800 in my checking right now. You want me to send what I have? You're not even going to ask me what it's for? Why would I? You wouldn't ask me if it wasn't real. How do you want it sent? I wrote in the notebook. Denise. Yes. No questions. What she had, not what she had to spare. The second was my older sister Tamara, who lives in Nashville. Tamara said she'd have to talk to her husband. She said she'd call me back. She didn't call back. I texted 2 days later. She said things were tight right now. Sorry. Tight. Tamara had posted a reel 2 weeks earlier from a resort in Scottsdale. I wrote, Tamara. No. The third was my cousin in Inglewood, who'd let me sleep on her couch when I first got to LA. She asked me what was going on. I said I had a bill situation. She said she could maybe do 200. I said it was 1,000. She said she'd have to see. Never saw. I wrote, Cousin Janelle. No. The fourth was a client I'd done occasional private event work for, a woman in Hancock Park who had told me multiple times I was the most reliable person she'd ever worked with. When I asked for the 1,000, she said she made it a rule not to lend money to people she had working relationships with. It just complicates things, she said. I wrote, Hancock Park client. No. Note. Most reliable person she'd ever worked with, but not reliable enough for $1,000. I'll skip to the ones that matter. Mrs. Whitmore was 11th on the list. I chose a calm afternoon. No guests. She was in a decent mood. I found her in the sitting room going through mail. Mrs. Whitmore, can I ask you something? She looked up with the expression of someone granting an appointment. I'm in a bit of a financial bind this week. I know it's an unusual ask, but would you be able to lend me $1,000? I'd pay it back by the end of the month. You could take it from my pay if you'd prefer. She put down the envelope she was holding. Cleo. The tone was familiar. Patient that isn't. We've talked about advances. It's not an advance. It's a loan, with a return date. She made a small expression. Not quite a frown. Not quite a smile. The face of someone explaining something to a child for the second time. I don't do that kind of arrangement with household staff. It's nothing personal. It's just a boundary I keep. Brief pause. And $1,000. You're not even telling me what it's for. You don't need to know what it's for to lend money to someone you trust. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said what she said at that brunch table. The same words, the same tone, like she'd said it before and would say it again. I wouldn't lend you $1,000 if my life depended on it. People like you don't pay things back. I held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Okay, I said. Thank you. I walked back to the kitchen. I wrote in the notebook, Diana Whitmore, no, underlined twice, with the exact quote beside it. Ashton was 13th. I sent her a text. Kept it simple. Hey Ashton, random question. Any chance you could lend me $1,000 this week? She read it, didn't respond. 6 hours later she sent a gif of a person shrugging. I wrote, Ashton. Non-answer, which is an answer. The 15th was a woman named Keisha from my building in Inglewood, who I'd helped move furniture for when she first arrived, and who I'd exchanged maybe 20 conversations with total. She texted back within 8 minutes. Of course, you okay? Zelle or Cash App? $1,000. No hesitation. From someone who barely knew me. I wrote, Keisha. Yes. Final count. 15 people. 3 said yes. Denise, Keisha, and a woman from my old church in Memphis who I'd included on a feeling and who called me back in under an hour. 12 said no or went quiet. I paid back everyone who lent money that same day. Double. With a message that said, thank you for trusting me. Here's twice what you sent. I needed to know who you were. Now I know. Denise sent me 17 voice messages in a row, convinced I had sent the money to the wrong account by mistake. After I closed the notebook and looked at the list for a long time, I started building my next life. But not before I dealt with what needed dealing with. The first thing I did was find an employment attorney. I was referred to a lawyer named Patricia Okonkwo, of Okonkwo and Reeves in Mid-Wilshire, who specialized in domestic worker labor violations. I booked a consultation. I came prepared. 3 years of documentation. My own calendar where I'd noted dates and hours, screenshots of texts where Mrs. Whitmore asked me to handle things that were way outside any housekeeper job description, notes from conversations, records of every event I had coordinated, and the central fact, 3 years of work, paid entirely off the books, no pay stubs, no W-2, nothing. Patricia Okonkwo listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. Then she put her pen down. Claudette, you worked as a live-in household employee for 3 years, full-time, continuous, with defined duties and a set schedule, paid off the books. That's right. Under California law, and under federal law, that is employment. She was required to pay payroll taxes, provide pay stubs, and comply with California's overtime and minimum wage requirements. Which means she owes you 3 years of back pay, calculated at the proper rates, overtime for every hour you worked over 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week, interest on unpaid wages, and penalties under the California Labor Code for willful wage theft. And that's before we get to the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, which gives you additional protections as a live-in worker. I let that land. And what does that look like in terms of a number? Patricia pulled out a calculator and a legal pad. Conservatively, based on what you've described, hours worked, events coordinated, the nature of the live-in arrangement, we're looking at somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 in back wages, overtime, and statutory penalties alone. If we add a civil claim for the defamation, the public statement she made about you in front of witnesses, that number goes up. I thought about Patricia, about Gloria, about Denise, who knew both their stories. And what if it's not just me? What if there's a pattern? Patricia looked at me steadily. Then we're having a different conversation. That night I called Denise and told her everything. The test, the lawyer, what I was building. She was quiet for a few seconds. Cleo, are you serious right now? I am. I'm in. What do you need? Patricia's contact info, and Gloria's if you have it. Denise had Gloria's number. Patricia, the first one, who'd left without her last paycheck, took 3 days to surface, but she came through. We met at a Caribbean spot on La Brea on a Wednesday afternoon. Me, Denise, Gloria, and Patricia, around a corner table with 4 glasses of water and a lot of years of the same story between us. Gloria was 53, quiet, measured. She'd worked in the Whitmore house for 14 months. She left without her final paycheck after Mrs. Whitmore accused her of taking a necklace. The accusation was reported to the staffing agency. Gloria lost 2 clients because of it. The necklace, she said, was in Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry drawer. She'd seen it there herself the week before she was let go. But she had no proof, no documentation, no way to push back. So she absorbed it and moved on. The first Patricia had been there for 8 months, 2 years before me. She left after Mrs. Whitmore told her the December pay would be adjusted because of breakage she allegedly caused. She never received a straight explanation of what had broken or how much it was worth. Her last deposit was $600 short. I didn't fight it, Patricia said, stirring her water with a straw, because fighting takes money I didn't have, and I needed the reference more than I needed the 600. I looked at the 3 of them. Gloria, Patricia, Denise, who had carried their stories and stayed quiet because she also believed there was nothing to do. There's a lawyer, I said, and there are laws that cover what happened to every one of you. What she did has a name and it has consequences. If you're willing, I'll cover everything. It won't cost you anything. I just need you to tell the truth about what happened. Gloria looked at the table. Patricia looked at me. You're going to ask me where the money comes from to cover this, I said. Already asked, Denise said with a small smile. She won't say. I'll tell you everything soon. Right now I just need to know. Are you in? Gloria was the first to speak. Slowly, with a voice that didn't shake but had weight in every word. You know how long it's been since someone asked me if I was in on something that was actually good for me? That was enough. All 4 of us went to Patricia Okonkwo's office the following week. What came next was weeks of careful, methodical work. Patricia filed separate claims, one for me with the California Labor Commissioner's Office for wage theft and overtime violations, and a parallel civil complaint for defamation based on the public statement in front of witnesses. For Gloria, a defamation claim for the false theft accusation that had cost her clients. For the first Patricia, a wage theft claim for the unpaid December balance. All of them tied to the same employer, the same property on Stradella Road, the same pattern. While that was being prepared, I did something Mrs. Whitmore did not see coming. I gave notice. Clean, professional, 2 weeks. Said I was pursuing other opportunities. Thanked her for the experience. She seemed more inconvenienced than anything else. She asked if I knew anyone who could replace me. I said I'd think about it. She was asking me for a favor while I had claims filed against her. Let me tell you about Yolanda, because Yolanda was the piece nobody saw coming, not even me. Yolanda Marsh had worked in that house 4 years before I got there, for about 6 months. She left to take a full-time position with benefits at a hotel, but those 6 months were enough. She found me through a domestic workers Facebook group. She'd seen a comment I'd posted years ago, recognized a detail I'd mentioned about the property. She sent me a direct message. "Are you still working for the Whitmores on Stradella?" I told her I had been. She said, "There's something I need to tell you." We met in person. She came with her phone and a folder. On her phone were screenshots, old ones from 6 years ago, of a text thread between Mrs. Whitmore and a friend. Messages about keeping staff off the books so they can't claim anything. About using the threat of bad agency references to prevent disputes. About how these women never push back because they can't afford to. Yolanda had seen these by accident. Mrs. Whitmore had left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while Yolanda was working nearby and had stepped outside to take a call. Yolanda read enough to understand what she was looking at. She was young, she was scared, she didn't know what to do with it, but she'd screenshotted the thread and kept it. "Why?" I asked her. She looked at me with something steady in her expression. "My grandmother was a domestic worker for 40 years, she said. She never had a single legal protection the whole time. She worked herself into the ground for people who never even learned her last name. I kept it because I knew someday it was going to matter to someone." I sent Yolanda's screenshots to Patricia Okonkwo the next morning. Patricia studied them for a long time. "Claudette," she said finally, "this establishes intent. This isn't just a labor violation anymore. This is documented, deliberate, systematic exploitation. This changes what we're asking for." How much does it change it? The wage theft claim alone, with penalties and interest under California law, which doubles unpaid wages when the violation is willful, is going to land somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000 for you specifically. The defamation claim is separate, with Yolanda's evidence establishing the pattern. The civil exposure for the Whitmores across all 3 of you exceeds $200,000. I sat with that for a moment. What happens next? I reach out to their counsel, and then we wait to see if they want to make this easy or hard. They tried to make it easy, which meant they knew exactly what they'd done. The Whitmore's attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch from a firm in Century City, contacted Patricia within a week of service, proposed a private mediation, wanted to keep it quiet. We went to mediation. Me, Patricia Okonkwo, Gloria, and the first Patricia. On the other side of the conference table at a mediation center in downtown Los Angeles, Gerald Fitch, an associate, and Mrs. Diana Whitmore herself, who I was seeing for the first time since my notice. She was wearing a blazer the color of slate and an expression she was working very hard to keep controlled. Gerald Fitch opened with an offer of $15,000 split between the 3 of us, less than $5,000 each. Patricia Okonkwo placed the documentation folder on the table. "With respect to Mr. Fitch, our position is that the appropriate resolution, based on documented wage theft over 3 years, willful overtime violations, statutory penalties under the California Labor Code, and civil liability for defamation, including the pattern of conduct established by the Yolanda Marsh communications, is $220,000, $130 for my client Claudette Williams, $45 for Gloria Reeves, and $45 for Patricia Simmons." Gerald Fitch looked at the folder, looked at Mrs. Whitmore. She was looking at me. I looked back. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't anger. It was something much quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of standing exactly where I was supposed to be. Diana, I used her first name, first time in 3 years. You told me people like me don't pay things back. I've been thinking about that. She didn't say anything. You were right that I don't pay things back. I paid back every person who ever trusted me. Double, the same day. What I don't do is stay quiet when I'm owed something. I paused. You paid me off the books for 3 years because you thought it protected you. It didn't. It just documented that you knew what you were doing. The room was very still. Gerald Fitch cleared his throat. Perhaps we can. The number is in the proposal, I said. We're not here to negotiate whether we get something. We're here to talk about how much. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her hands. I thought we had a good working relationship, she said quietly. It sounded almost like a question. You had a good worker, I said. That's not the same thing. Gerald Fitch asked for 24 hours. They came back at 60,000 total. We declined. They came back at 110. We declined. On the third round, with Patricia signaling that we were prepared to go to a full civil trial with Yolanda's messages entered as evidence, they came to 205,000, 125 for me, 40 for Gloria, 40 for the first Patricia. We took it. I signed the settlement agreement on a Thursday afternoon at a law office on Wilshire Boulevard. Outside, Los Angeles was doing what it always does. Sun and traffic and the particular dry heat of a city that doesn't notice you unless you make it. I signed my full name in my best handwriting and thought about my grandmother Rose in her hotel housekeeper uniform, 31 years, and what she would say if she could see this piece of paper. She would say, "That's what I was trying to tell you, baby. I need to tell you about Ashton before we get to the ending, because Ashton was the moment that even I didn't see completely coming, and it might be my favorite part of this whole story. While everything was being settled, I was quietly building what I'm about to tell you about. Low profile, nothing on social media, only the people directly involved knew anything. Then I got a DM from an account I didn't recognize. I clicked it. It was Ashton. Hey Cleo, I heard you're doing really well. I'd love to connect and catch up. Would you be open to meeting? I read that message 3 times. I said yes. We met at a coffee place in Silver Lake. Her choice. She arrived looking softer than I remembered. Less of the careless confidence, more of something uncertain underneath. I heard you have a business, she said after about 30 seconds of small talk. Something in events? Something like that. That's amazing, she smiled. Actually, I've been working on a concept, something in the experiential space, and I've been looking for someone to partner with, someone who really understands how events work at a high level. I think you'd be incredible. She paused. I'm looking for an investment partner. The starting number would be around 50,000. I looked at her for a moment. Ashton, when I texted you asking to borrow $1,000, you sent me a shrug gif. Do you remember that? She blinked. That was, I didn't have, you had it. You absolutely had it. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. You didn't lend it because I was the housekeeper, and housekeepers don't get that kind of consideration. I understand that. It wasn't personal. It was just how you saw things. I looked at her directly. But I'm not going to be your investment partner. Not because I don't have the resources. Because money and respect have to go together. And the respect came too late, Ashton. Way too late for this particular opportunity. She didn't have a response. She picked up her bag and left. I sat there for a while finishing my coffee watching people walk by on the sidewalk outside. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt clear. And clear lasts longer than satisfied ever does. Denise got the call on a Sunday. I drove to her apartment in Inglewood, sat at her kitchen table, and put a folded piece of paper in front of her. What's this? She said. Open it. It was a partnership proposal, 50-50. Me bringing the capital investment, her bringing the operational experience, and the network she'd been quietly building for 6 years. A professional event planning and staffing company, licensed, insured, with a focus on corporate events, private functions, and high-end brand activations in the Los Angeles market. Full staff with real contracts. A business that used every skill I'd developed in those years of being the person who made other people's events happen without ever getting her name in the program. Denise read it slowly, read it again, looked at me. Cleo, yeah, where does the capital come from? I smiled. I'll tell you the whole lottery ticket story in about 20 minutes. But first, are you in? She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into the pocket of her hoodie, and held up her coffee mug. I'm in. Today, almost 17 months after the night I sat in my car in a bank parking lot unable to move, I wake up at 6:15 in a 2-bedroom apartment in Leimert Park that is mine. Lease in my name, key in my hand, decorated exactly the way I want it. I drink coffee on my balcony before I open my laptop. I have a view of the neighborhood I grew up in, Los Angeles loving, a neighborhood with real history, with real people, with murals on the walls, and a jazz club I can hear on warm nights. Williams and Denise Events has 11 active contracts. 2 tech companies in Culver City, a law firm in Century City, a production company in Burbank, a nonprofit in Koreatown, and a range of private clients who found us through referral. We have 9 employees, all of them with proper contracts, all of them with taxes filed correctly, all of them paid on time, every time. I know all of their names. I know who has kids, who's in school, who's working towards something. There is no camera pointed at the door where they keep their things. Gloria works with us now. She was one of the first people I hired. The first Patricia started her own cleaning business in the valley, and we refer clients to each other. Yolanda is our go-to vendor for event linens and decor. She started a rental business, and we're steady partners. The woman from my church in Memphis who sent $1,000 the same day I asked, I helped her formalize a small catering operation she'd been running informally out of her home for years. She's licensed now and doing well. Denise is my business partner, my friend, my chosen family. When our end-of-year revenue came in and I sent her the final number, she called me, and all I could hear for a moment was her crying. Then she said, "Remember the $500 I sent you that day?" And I said, "I remember everything." And she said, "Yeah, me too." I heard through indirect channels that Mrs. Whitmore and Mr. Whitmore had significant disagreements about the settlement, that the estate on Stradella Road went on the market about 8 months after everything resolved, that the staffing agency she used stopped working with her entirely once the nature of the claims became known in the industry. And those things do become known. What I know for certain is that I don't think about Diana Whitmore often anymore. And when I do, it's not with anger. It's with the particular clarity that comes from having named something correctly. I want to talk to you about something real before we close, because if you've been watching this long, I think part of you needed to hear more than just what happened to me. Part of you is in something right now, or has been, or knows someone who is. Domestic workers in the United States, housekeepers, nannies, caregivers, personal assistants, are among the most underprotected workers in the country. For a long time, domestic workers were explicitly excluded from the major labor protections that cover other workers. That's changed in many states, but the knowledge gap remains enormous. Most domestic workers don't know what they're legally entitled to, not because they're not smart, but because nobody tells them. Here is what I wish someone had told me. If you are a domestic worker in the United States, you have rights. The specific rights depend on your state, but in many states, including California, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, and others, domestic workers have protections that include the right to be paid at least minimum wage for all hours worked, overtime pay when you work more than a certain number of hours per day or week, meal and rest breaks, written notice of pay rates before you start, and in some states, additional protections for live-in workers. Being paid off the books does not erase these rights. It actually works in your favor legally, because it is the employer's obligation, not yours, to handle payroll taxes and documentation. If your employer fails to do that, they are in violation of federal and state law, and you can file a claim for back wages and penalties. Wage theft is what it's called when an employer fails to pay you what you're legally owed. It happens all the time in domestic work, often because employers believe, incorrectly, that informal arrangements protect them. They don't. And you have options. If you are a domestic worker and you believe your rights have been violated, here is where to start. The National Domestic Workers Alliance has resources and can help connect you with local organizations. Your state's Department of Labor or Labor Commissioner's Office takes wage theft complaints. In California, that's the Labor Commissioner's Office. In New York, it's the Department of Labor. Many of these complaints can be filed at no cost to you. Legal aid organizations in most major cities offer free consultations for workers who can't afford an attorney. and the Fair Labor Standards Act covers most domestic workers at the federal level. Information is available at dol.gov. Document everything. Save your texts. Keep your own records of hours worked. If you receive any written communication about your job, save it. If something happens that feels wrong, write it down with the date and details while it's fresh. You might never need it, but if you do, it becomes your proof. And if someone has ever used the fact that they have more money than you as a reason why you should accept being treated with less dignity, I want you to hear this clearly. That is not authority. That is abuse. It has a name, it has legal consequences, and you do not have to absorb it. The thing that makes me angriest looking back isn't the specific things Mrs. Whitmore said or did. It's that I stayed quiet for so long because I didn't know I had options. Because nobody in my position ever explained that I had rights in writing, in law, enforceable in court. That information belongs to you, so I'm passing it forward. Thank you for being here with me through this whole story. Truly, you didn't have to stay, and you did. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that there is a way out. With the friend who's gritting her teeth every day in a situation that's eating her alive. With your sister, your cousin, anyone who needs to be reminded that having less money than someone does not make you less than them. Subscribe here because there are more stories coming, and every one of them is real. And tell me in the comments, if you ran the $1,000 test on the people in your life right now, what do you think you'd find out? Who do you think would surprise you? And in which direction? I'm asking because I think you already know the answer, and that answer matters more than you might realize. $1,000 was the cheapest investment I ever made. It showed me exactly who people really were, before I showed them who I'd become. See you next time.